I'll never marry you. Cold billionaire said. 4 years later, he saw her in the hospital and regretted everything. I'm your storyteller, James. I hope you're all right, wherever you are in the world tonight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know where this story is reaching your heart, this channel. It's more than just stories. It's a place for the unheard hearts, for quiet nights, for deep souls that still believe in love, healing, and new beginnings. If you're listening and something in these words touches you, don't stay a stranger. Subscribe, not just to the channel, but to a journey of feeling again. Every view, every like, every share keeps this dream alive. I give my voice and my heart here, and if it finds you tonight, then maybe, just maybe, we both needed this story. I pray peace finds your heart. I pray love walks back into your life in ways you never expected. And I pray that whatever storm you're in, it passes gently. Now, let's begin. The rain fell in thick, slanted sheets against the towering glass windows of the Devereaux corporate building, streaking down like tears from the heavens, as if the sky itself could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. Inside the 34th floor penthouse office, the air was thick with tension, shadows dancing across the marble floor from the flickering fireplace at the far end. Linda stood just inside the door, her coat soaked and clinging to her like a second skin, her shoes dripping a silent trail of water onto the expensive rug beneath her trembling feet. Her breath came out in shivers, her chest rising and falling as her dark eyes, wide with hesitation and quiet hope, locked onto the tall figure standing across the room. Mr. Jack Devereaux, the elusive billionaire CEO, stood with his back to her, his form rigid, staring out at the storm as if it were the only thing that could match the chaos in his mind. The lightning illuminated his sharp jawline, the fine lines of control etched into his expression, and the coldness that always seemed to radiate from him like a shield against the world. But tonight was different. Something about the storm, the silence, the vulnerability in her eyes. Something cracked through the ice in him just enough to let the heat in. She stepped forward slowly, each movement careful and unsure, her soaked braids sticking to her smooth skin, her hands clenching and unclenching nervously at her sides. "You called me?" she whispered, her voice barely louder than the thunder that rolled overhead. Jack turned, his stormy gray eyes meeting hers, unreadable yet piercing. "You came," he said simply, as if surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to brave the night, the rain or the memories between them. And then the silence swallowed them both whole. Linda took another step closer, her heart thudding in her chest like a frightened bird. She wasn't sure what she was doing here, why she had answered his call after months of tension, after years of watching him keep everyone at a distance, including her. Maybe it was the way he'd said her name over the phone earlier, low and urgent. Maybe it was the ache she still carried for him, the way her soul hadn't fully healed from the last time he'd pushed her away. Or maybe it was just the hope that tonight might be different. Jack's gaze dropped for the briefest second to her trembling hands, and then without a word he moved toward her. The moment his hand touched her cheek, warm and firm against her chilled skin, she closed her eyes and leaned in, breath hitching. He kissed her, not tenderly, not cautiously, but with a hunger that melted everything between them. Her body molded to his as his arms pulled her in, lifting her slightly off the ground, and her wet coat fell to the floor in a forgotten heap. The windows fogged up behind them as their silhouettes merged in the dim light, two lost souls tangled in one desperate, fiery moment. She felt the hardness of his chest, the urgency in his touch, and the passion he'd never shown before. For once it felt like the walls around his heart had crumbled, and she was inside. The fire crackled behind them, adding warmth to a night filled with storm and longing, and their bodies moved together in rhythm. Urgent, heated, and full of unspoken words they were both too afraid to say aloud. Hours passed in that cocoon of passion and thunder, the storm outside growing wilder, as if nature itself was echoing the chaos and craving inside them. Jack laid her gently on the velvet couch near the fire, his eyes lingering on her face, her soft curves, the delicate lines of vulnerability, etched in every breath she took. Linda reached for his hand, her fingers brushing against his with a tenderness that made his chest tighten. No words were exchanged, but in the silence there was understanding, or so she thought. As the night deepened, their breaths slowed, and she rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. For the first time, she let herself believe he loved her, that beneath his cold exterior, something real lived inside him, something that had finally chosen her. She imagined waking up beside him, not just tonight, but tomorrow, and the day after that. She imagined a future, one where she wasn't just a visitor in his world, but someone who belonged. But that fragile dream shattered like glass the moment sunlight touched the edge of the skyline. The storm had passed. The room was quiet now, too quiet, and so was Jack. Linda stirred, smiling softly, eyes still closed, as her fingers traced the bare skin of his shoulder. But his body was no longer relaxed against hers. He was sitting up, buttoning his white dress shirt with clinical precision, his face turned away, eyes fixed once more on the skyline that now glistened with rain. The coldness had returned, not just in his expression, but in the energy between them. Linda sat up, the blanket slipping down her shoulders, her voice still heavy with sleep and hope. "Jack," she whispered, unsure why dread was creeping up her spine like icy fingers. He didn't look at her as he replied, his voice sharp and void of the softness it held hours before. "Don't misunderstand last night." The words hit her harder than any slap could have. She blinked, unsure if she heard him right, but he continued, buttoning the last cuff and reaching for his watch. It was what it was. Nothing more. Linda's breath caught in her throat. "Jack, what are you saying?" she asked, barely able to keep the tremble out of her voice. He finally looked at her, and there was nothing in his eyes. Not passion, not regret, not even recognition of the woman he had just held so intimately. "I will never marry you," he said, flatly, like he was stating a fact, not breaking someone's heart. "You knew what this was." She stared at him, her mouth slightly open, her heart thudding so loudly in her chest she thought it might break through her ribs. I thought it meant something," she whispered, her voice cracking, eyes glossing over with tears. Jack grabbed his coat from the back of the chair, slipping it on with that same robotic efficiency, indifferent to the emotional storm now rising in the room. "Don't make this more than it is, Linda," he said, walking toward the door, his back already turned. "It's better this way." And just like that, he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but it might as well have been a gunshot. Linda sat there, motionless, the morning sun casting light on her still bare skin, her heart lying in pieces on the velvet couch. The fire had gone out. The rain had stopped. But inside her, a storm stronger than the night before had just begun. She stood slowly, gathering her clothes in silence, each movement heavy with disbelief and humiliation. Her bare feet padded softly across the marble floor, now cold and heartless beneath her. She didn't cry, not yet. The tears stayed locked behind her lashes, too stunned to fall. She dressed, picked up her coat, still damp and clinging, and walked toward the elevator like a ghost. As she rode down alone, each floor that passed felt like a memory falling away from her, a hope collapsing, a belief that had just died. Outside, the streets glistened with rain, puddles catching the reflection of the towering building she'd just exited. Not a place of love, but of illusion. She stepped into the street, the chill of the morning air hitting her face, mixing with the ache in her chest. And when the first tear finally fell, it was swallowed by the rain-slicked sidewalk. She didn't look back. She couldn't. That night had changed everything, not because of what they shared, but because of what it revealed. She had given him her body, her heart, her trust, and he had handed her nothing in return but silence and cold rejection. As she disappeared into the fog of the city, her mind whispered the only truth she could cling to now. "I will never come back to him again." And somewhere far above, behind steel and glass, Jack stood by his window once more, his reflection clear, his heart still locked, and his soul unaware of what he had just lost. Linda didn't remember how long she walked after leaving the building that morning, only that each step felt heavier than the last, as if the pavement beneath her feet was trying to pull her back towards something she never wanted to see again. The city felt foreign now, familiar streets suddenly colder, brighter lights suddenly harsher. She had no umbrella, no destination, just a coat that clung damp to her skin and a hollow ache that seemed to replace her heartbeat. She didn't go home that night. She couldn't. The apartment still held shadows of hope, memories of messages she once waited for, and dreams that had now turned into reminders of foolishness. Instead, she checked into a modest motel far from the center of the city and collapsed onto the bed without changing, her body curling in on itself like a wounded animal. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Her eyes stayed open, watching the cracks in the ceiling, her mind playing his voice on a cruel loop. Don't misunderstand last night. I will never marry you. It echoed through her like a curse, like a final nail sealing away a chapter she never even got to write. The next few weeks passed in a haze of silence and survival. Linda left the motel, rented a small studio on the outskirts of the city with the little savings she had left, and began working long shifts as a hospital receptionist, keeping her head down, her heart closed, and her past buried deep beneath her polished smile. But the ache inside her didn't fade. It merely disguised itself in routine, hiding behind the clock-in cards and the vending machine coffees she lived on. It wasn't until the 5th week that her world shifted again, this time in a way she never expected. That morning had started like any other. The dull buzzing of her alarm, the hum of the kettle, the quiet rustle of her coat as she slipped it on and prepared to head to work. But halfway through her walk, her stomach twisted sharply, her steps faltered, and before she could even process what was happening, she found herself leaning against the cold bricks of an alley wall, retching until there was nothing left. Her hands shook, her body trembling, her breath short and uneven. She blamed it on exhaustion, maybe stress or something she'd eaten. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered the truth she was too afraid to speak. It wasn't just the nausea, it was the tenderness in her chest, the fatigue that clung to her like fog, the way her body felt no longer entirely her own. That night, after her shift, she stood in front of a pharmacy aisle, her fingers hovering uncertainly over the boxes of pregnancy tests, her heart slamming against her ribs as her hand finally reached out. She bought 2, just to be sure, and barely made it home before locking herself in the bathroom with shaking hands and unsteady breath. Minutes later, she stared at the tiny plus sign, the confirmation that changed everything. Pregnant. With his child. The room spun. Her knees gave way, and she sat on the cold tiles, clutching the plastic test like it held the power to rewrite time. Tears fell, but they weren't just sadness. They were fear, disbelief, longing, but buried beneath it all was something else, something gentler. Love. It didn't make sense how something so painful could also carry something so beautiful. Linda curled her arms around her knees, resting her forehead there as she rocked slightly, her mind trying to grasp what her heart already knew. She was going to have his baby. A child born not from a relationship, not from love returned, but from a moment she thought meant everything, and he thought meant nothing. For a long time she just sat there, frozen. She didn't know what to do, who to tell. There was no family to call, no close friend she could confide in. She had been alone before, but now her solitude carried more weight. She had another heartbeat inside her, another future. For a moment the thought of calling Jack passed through her like a breeze. Maybe he would react differently now. Maybe he would see the baby as a sign, a second chance. But then she remembered his voice again, flat and sharp. It's better this way. She couldn't face another moment of that rejection. She couldn't bear the thought of him saying the same thing, but this time to their child. So she did the only thing she could. She packed up what little she had, handed in her resignation, and disappeared. No forwarding address, no social media, no trace of her remained in the city Jack Devereaux ruled from his glass kingdom. She moved to a quiet town 2 hours away, small enough to be peaceful, big enough to find work. She rented a modest one-bedroom apartment, and with trembling determination, she rebuilt her life from scratch. Her days were filled with shifts at a local clinic where no one knew her name or her past, and her nights were filled with online research, prenatal vitamins, and quiet moments sitting on her tiny balcony, rubbing her stomach and whispering promises into the night air. "I've got you," she would say softly. "I don't know what I'm doing yet, but I'll learn. For you." As her belly grew, so did her resolve. She walked every day, took birthing classes alone, and picked out baby names at the library, sitting by the window as rain tapped gently against the glass. The pain of what she'd left behind never truly vanished. It just lived in a quieter part of her, a memory she folded into the corners of her heart, like an old letter she refused to reread. When the day finally came, it was neither dramatic nor expected. It started with a soft ache in her back, a strange pressure she couldn't quite place, until hours later she realized she was in labor. With no one to call but a taxi, she clutched her hospital bag and made her way to the nearest emergency room, her breaths shallow and fast as panic danced just beneath her skin. The nurses were kind, the room sterile and humming with fluorescent light, and within hours, through screams and sweat and tears, she brought not one but two baby boys into the world. Twins. The doctor smiled gently, placing the tiny bundles in her arms, and as she looked down at their peaceful sleeping faces, she felt something she hadn't in years. Wholeness. They were perfect, both of them. Tiny hands curled into fists, little mouths puckering in sleep. But it was their eyes, stormy gray, familiar, haunting, that stopped her breath. Jack's eyes. Her heart twisted, a strange mix of pain and love wrapping around her as she kissed each tiny forehead. "You are not him," she whispered. "You are better. You are mine." The first year was a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, bottles, lullabies, and moments of such raw exhaustion that she sometimes found herself crying in the kitchen at 3 a.m. But it was also filled with first smiles, tiny coos, the way they both reached for her at the same time with perfect trust. She worked nights answering phones at the clinic, kept the boys in a small daycare down the street, and learned how to stretch every dollar without losing her mind. The apartment was small, but she decorated it with love. Hand-painted stars above their cribs, lullaby lyrics on the wall, photos of the three of them filling every corner. She never spoke Jack's name, not even in her thoughts. He was gone, erased. The boys would grow up knowing love, knowing strength, and never needing to question if they were enough. That was her vow. There were nights she stood at the window, holding one twin while the other slept, watching the city lights in the distance flicker like broken promises. And on those nights she would whisper again, "We're fine without him. We are. We have each other." Linda never asked for pity, never expected help. She wore her strength like armor, her motherhood like a crown. The boys, whom she named Jalen and Jordan, grew fast, beautiful and bright, their laughter filling the apartment like sunlight. One loved music, always banging toy drums. The other adored books and would fall asleep clutching bedtime stories. Linda found peace in the chaos, grace in the struggle, and quiet joy in the way her sons looked at her like she was their entire world. She had given up everything, yes, but she had gained everything too. And though she didn't know it yet, though the past seemed buried for good, fate, silent and steady, was preparing its next storm, one that would test everything she had built and stir a chapter she thought she had closed forever. Jack's hand was still warm from the handshake with the hospital board's chairman as he adjusted his cufflinks and turned into the East Wing corridor, expecting nothing more than a smooth transition into the financial discussion about expansion plans, when the sound of innocent laughter sliced through the silence like a forgotten melody. So familiar it stopped him mid-stride. He turned his head slowly, unsure why his chest had tightened so suddenly, until his eyes locked onto a woman standing at the far end of the hallway, her back to the sunlight streaming through the stained glass window. She hadn't changed. No, she'd only become more luminous with time. Her posture was effortlessly graceful, wrapped in a simple cream-colored dress, her long dark hair cascading down her back in soft waves. And though 4 years had passed since he last saw her, his heart instantly recognized her. Linda. He wasn't supposed to see her here. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. But time bent in on itself in that moment, collapsing 4 years of silence and space into one breathless instant. She was smiling, crouched down as she spoke to two boys. No, two identical little boys who couldn't have been older than 3 or 4, their matching plaid shirts and denim jeans a perfect pair. One boy ran a small circle around her, giggling, while the other clutched her hand, bouncing on his toes with a wide grin. Jack felt like the floor shifted beneath him, and it wasn't just the shock of seeing her, it was the boys. The one chasing his brother had a laugh that pierced Jack's chest, like it had been etched into his soul long before he ever heard it. And then the boy turned, his dark hair slightly tousled, his smile toothy and bright, and Jack's entire world slowed down. The boy's eyes, his exact eyes, the shape, the deep hazel flecks within the brown, the way the brows arched just a little too much on the right side. It was like seeing a reflection of himself, shrunken into a child. He staggered a step forward, unable to breathe, suddenly nauseated with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a hope he didn't dare entertain. "No," he whispered under his breath, barely aware he had spoken aloud. "It can't be." But the pounding in his chest, the way his limbs trembled, it all screamed the opposite. His instincts, honed over years of surviving boardrooms, betrayals, and high-stake deals, never failed him. And right now, those instincts were howling. He stared so long he barely noticed the chair scraping behind him, or the nurse who bumped his arm as she passed. Linda turned slightly at the sound, and her eyes caught his. Their gazes collided, and the years melted in that instant. Her breath hitched, her lips parted slightly, and she stiffened. The warmth in her face vanished. She didn't smile, she didn't wave. She just stood frozen, stunned, as if she'd seen a ghost she never wanted to meet again. Jack took a hesitant step toward her, his throat dry. His entire body screamed to move, to ask, to demand answers, but his feet felt like they were trapped in wet cement. One of the boys tugged her hand, looking up at her curiously, while the other kept glancing between her and Jack, sensing something was wrong. "Mommy," the boy with Jack's eyes said, "who's that man?" Jack's heart exploded in his chest at that word. Mommy. That tiny voice. The way it called her. But more than anything, it was the fact that the boy had just confirmed the truth. She had children. 2, twins. And they were hers. But were they his? His knees buckled slightly, and he reached out to the wall to steady himself, eyes never leaving her face. She looked away first. Her fingers tightened around the boy's hand as she whispered something in his ear and ushered both children to stand behind her, like a mother lion shielding her cubs. Jack had seen her brave, furious, broken, but never this guarded. She was protecting them. From him. He didn't remember moving, but suddenly he was standing just a few feet away. Her perfume hit him like a wave, soft vanilla and sandalwood, the same scent that used to linger on his pillows. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Linda." But she didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on his, conflicted, unreadable. "Are they mine?" he asked, the words tumbling out with the desperation of a man who hadn't known he'd been missing something until it was standing right in front of him. She flinched, then squared her shoulders. "You shouldn't be here," she said coldly, her voice lower than he remembered, but still laced with the same elegance. "I'm here on business," he replied automatically, but his gaze dropped to the boys now clinging to the fabric of her dress. "You didn't tell me." "There was nothing to tell," she answered quickly, her tone clipped. "It's been 4 years, Jack. You made your choice." The weight of her words crushed him. "I didn't know," he breathed. "Linda, you can't expect me to just see them and walk away. You don't get to claim them now just because fate put you in the same hallway," she snapped, though her voice trembled. One of the boys peeked from behind her leg, his eyes curious. "Why does he look like me?" he asked innocently. Jack's breath caught again. Linda closed her eyes for a brief second before crouching to face both boys. "Let's go now," she said, voice gentle but firm, avoiding the question. Jack reached out a hand instinctively. "Wait. Please." She looked up at him slowly, her eyes rimmed with emotion, resentment, sadness, and something else buried deep beneath the years. "You don't get to come back into my life and ask questions you forfeited the right to ask," she whispered. You chose your work. You chose to leave. You chose to cut me out. I didn't know you were pregnant, he said hoarsely. Would that have changed anything? She asked bitterly. He stared at her, stunned. Of course it would have. You ignored every letter, she interrupted. Every message I left. I bled alone. I went through everything alone. Jack's heart shattered. Letters, he echoed. What letters? Her lips pressed into a thin line. I sent you everything. I told you I was pregnant. I even waited, hoped, for just one reply. But then I stopped waiting. He shook his head, dazed. I never received anything. I sent them to your company, she said quietly. To your office. Jack's mind raced. His assistant, his team, his father. His father had taken over everything after their breakup, handling correspondence, screening messages. Oh, God. My father, he whispered. He must have intercepted them. Linda stood slowly, clenching her jaw to keep her composure. Well, now you know. But nothing changes. These boys are my life, Jack. They don't know you. They've never asked about a father because they never knew they didn't have one. I've been everything for them, and I won't let you confuse them now. Jack's voice cracked as he took another step forward, eyes on the children. Can I at least know their names? She hesitated, her shoulders stiff. Then, quietly, she answered, Liam and Elias. Jack swallowed hard, the names slicing into him like glass. He crouched, trying not to scare them. Liam, Elias, he murmured, and the boys tilted their heads curiously. You're beautiful, he whispered, a tear sliding down his cheek. Linda looked away. Don't do this, she said shakily. Don't make this harder. He stood up again, struggling to keep his emotions at bay. I don't want to take them from you. I don't even know what I want. I need time to understand, to fix this. You can't fix 4 years, she said bitterly. And I don't want you near them until I'm sure you won't disappear again. Let me prove it, Jack said desperately. Let me earn back whatever I can. Linda looked up at him, eyes filled with a storm of emotion. I don't trust you, she said. I don't forgive you. And I don't want you around unless you're ready to be a father every day. Not just when it's convenient. He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what she meant. The boys were tugging her hand now, restless. She gave him one last glance. Don't follow us, she said, then turned and walked away, the boys by her side, their little hands gripping hers tightly. Jack stood there, alone in the hallway, staring after them long after they turned the corner. His hands trembled as he finally sank into a bench, everything around him a blur. He had come here for business, but he had found his entire past, his greatest love, and possibly his sons. The truth burned inside him like wildfire. He wasn't ready for the answers, but now that he had seen them, he knew one thing for certain. He would never walk away again. Jack didn't move for a long time after she disappeared around the corner with the boys. His mind was still swirling in a fog of disbelief, longing, and fury at himself. His father, the past, all of it. The sterile hallway felt too bright, too hollow now, echoing with the distant laughter of children that only reminded him of what he had missed. His legs finally responded, as if waking from a trance, and before reason could stop him, he was moving again. Fast, with desperation, building in every step. He wasn't thinking about the board meeting anymore, or the investment deal awaiting his signature in the executive wing. This wasn't about business anymore. It hadn't been since the moment those familiar hazel eyes looked back at him from a tiny, innocent face. He turned the corner just as the sliding doors to the pediatric unit closed, and for one terrifying moment, he thought she was gone. But then he saw her again, Linda, standing near the vending machine, her back tense, one boy in her arms and the other tugging her wrist, asking about juice. He slowed his steps, not wanting to frighten the boys, his chest tightening with every breath. Linda, he called softly, unable to stop himself. She stiffened before slowly turning, her face tightening the moment she saw him. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her posture instantly defensive. Jack, she said, her tone clipped and cold, her eyes flickering down to the boys as if shielding them with a single glance. Why are you here? Her voice carried no warmth, only weariness, the kind that came from carrying too much alone. Jack stepped closer, hands trembling at his sides. "I need to know," he whispered, his voice ragged, barely above the hum of the machines nearby. "Are those boys mine?" The question clawed its way out of his throat, shaking loose years of suppressed hope and unresolved pain. Linda looked at him, and for a brief second something cracked in her eyes, a flicker of sorrow, anger, and something far too complicated to name. But she didn't speak. She just stared at him in silence, her chest rising and falling, the boys now looking up at both of them with wide, curious eyes. The silence was heavier than 1,000 words. "Please," Jack choked out, feeling his knees grow weak. "Just tell me." But Linda turned her attention back to the boys, crouched down and guided them toward a nurse waiting nearby. "I'll be back in a few minutes," she told the woman, her voice softening only for them. "Get them the apple juice they like, not the orange one." The nurse nodded with a kind smile, gently leading the boys away. Only when they were out of earshot did Linda straighten, eyes locking onto Jack's with fire and steel. "You want to know now," she said, crossing her arms, voice low. "After vanishing, after discarding me like some office mistake, now you want the truth?" Jack winced. "I didn't discard you. I was hurting. I was angry. I thought you—" "You thought wrong," she snapped. "And instead of asking, instead of facing anything, you ran." Jack looked down, ashamed. "I was told you left without a word." Linda laughed bitterly. "Convenient. Maybe that's what your father wanted you to think. Maybe it made it easier for you to go on pretending I didn't exist." "My father controlled everything then," Jack muttered, half to himself. "I didn't even check the letters myself. I didn't think—" "Exactly. You didn't think," she said sharply. "I tried to reach you. I wrote, I called, I begged the universe to give me a sign that you cared. And when nothing came, I stopped hoping." Her voice wavered for the first time. "I raised them alone, Jack. I watched them take their first steps alone. I stayed up through their fevers, through the nightmares, through every birthday when they asked why no one else came." Jack swallowed, the lump in his throat. "You should have told me in person." "You should have asked," she replied. The silence that followed stretched painfully between them. "So," she said finally, "you want the truth?" Jack nodded slowly. "I need it. Not just for me. For them." Linda studied him for a long time. "Then let's end this guesswork. DNA. I'll allow it. But once the results are in, I don't want half measures, Jack. If they're yours and you decide to stay, you stay. You don't disappear again. You don't pick and choose when to be a father." Her eyes bore into him, daring him to flinch. He didn't. "I'll do it," he said. "Tomorrow." She nodded once, curtly. "I'll arrange it." A week later, Jack sat in his penthouse office, the sunlight pouring through the tall glass windows, doing nothing to ease the icy grip in his chest. The manila envelope sat in front of him on the table, taunting, terrifying, and sacred. His fingers hovered over it for what felt like an eternity before finally ripping the seal and pulling out the paper within. And just like that, his world collapsed. 99.9% paternal match. The words glared back at him, unyielding and real. The edges of the paper blurred as tears filled his eyes. 2 sons. He had 2 sons, and he had missed everything. Their first cry, their first word, their tiny fingers wrapping around someone else's thumb. Jack pressed the heel of his hand into his chest, trying to breathe, but the weight there was too much. He hadn't realized how much he'd wanted it, how much he'd needed this connection, this purpose, until now. And now all he could feel was the unbearable loss of time. His hands trembled as he placed the paper down, covering his face with both palms as a sob escaped him. Guttural, raw, and lonely. No boardroom had ever made him cry, no failed deal, no betrayal. But this truth, it broke him open. Not just because he had sons, but because he hadn't been their father. He had lived in a void of work and deals and hotels and distractions, all while 2 little boys had existed with his blood, his eyes, and his smile. They had laughed, fallen, grown, and he hadn't even known their names until a week ago. And Linda had borne all of it alone. The heartbreak, the labor, the fear, the strength. She had become a mother without the support she deserved. He couldn't go back and fix it, but he could never walk away now. He rose, pacing the room, his hands clenched at his sides. He had to see them. He had to make it right. But how? How do you step into a child's life after missing the years that matter most? What do you say to the woman whose tears you never wiped, whose pain you never shared, whose love you once buried under your ego? He wanted to run to them, to hug them, to tell them who he was. But he knew he hadn't earned it. Not yet. Maybe never. And still, he had to try. Linda answered on the second ring. "I got the results," he said, voice cracked and soft. A pause. Then, "And? They're mine," he whispered. "I know. I'm sorry," he added. "It doesn't change anything," she said gently but not cruelly. "It doesn't erase the years. But maybe it's a start. Please," he begged. "I want to be in their lives." Another pause. Then she said, "Then show up. Not once, not twice, every day. For them. Not for me." "I will," he promised. "Whatever it takes. I'll be the man they deserve." "Then we'll see," she said, and ended the call. Jack stood in the silence of his office, the city stretching before him like a sea of lost time. But he wasn't running anymore. He would be their father, even if it broke him piece by piece to become worthy of it. Jack didn't sleep the night he got the DNA results, not even for a minute. The paper lay flat on his bedside table, its words seared into his memory, haunting him with every breath he took. He had spent most of the night pacing the marble floors of his penthouse, every echo of his footfalls reminding him of the silence he'd lived in for years, the kind of silence that now felt suffocating. And for the first time in his life, Jack wished he didn't have so much space, so much wealth, so much distance between himself and the people who mattered. The people he didn't even know mattered until it was nearly too late. As the sun rose over the skyline and cast long shadows across the floor, he finally stopped moving. His reflection in the mirror looked foreign, exhausted eyes, 5 o'clock stubble, shoulders heavy with a weight pride had never let him feel before. And tucked beneath his arm as he left the penthouse was a small box, not extravagant, not lavish, but thoughtful. Inside were two tiny astronaut backpacks, matching but personalized with the names Liam and Elias stitched in dark blue thread. A handwritten note rested beneath them, the first letter he had written by hand in over a decade. Not for business, not for strategy, just a few lines in unsteady script. "If you ever feel ready to use these, I hope they remind you I want to walk with you now, even if I didn't before." That morning, Jack stood in front of the hospital entrance like a schoolboy outside a principal's office, adjusting the collar of his coat, clutching the box in his arms like a fragile confession. He watched nurses buzz around, patients entering and exiting, lives unfolding, none aware that his was crumbling quietly. When Linda emerged through the automatic doors, she didn't see him at first. Her hair was pulled up in a loose bun, strands falling over her face, her scrubs wrinkled at the edges, her gait hurried yet practiced, like a woman too used to surviving her day on muscle memory alone. One boy clung to each of her hands, their steps trying to keep up with hers, little sneakers squeaking across the tiled floor. Jack stepped forward, his voice soft but desperate. "Linda!" She turned, startled, her face tightening the second she saw him. The boys looked up too, curiosity flickering in their eyes. "Jack," she said, emotionless, already sounding tired of this conversation before it had even begun. "Why are you here?" "I came to see them," he said quickly, nervously. "And you?" He lifted the box slowly, unsure. "I brought something." "We don't need anything from you," she replied immediately, her tone sharper than her gaze. "We're not a project to fix." He nodded slowly, swallowing his disappointment. "It's not about fixing anything. It's just, I wanted them to have something from me. I wanted them to know I'm trying." Linda adjusted Elias's backpack on his shoulder while shifting Liam closer to her side. "They don't know who you are yet," she said, "and I'm not ready to explain you." "Can we talk, please?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Just a few minutes. She looked down at the boys, then nodded once, pointing to a nearby bench. 5 minutes, she said flatly, but not in front of them. She led the boys toward a small play area and told the nurse on duty to watch them for a moment. Then she returned and stood across from Jack, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You don't get to show up here and act like time didn't happen," she said. "You don't get to offer gifts like they fill in the cracks." "I'm not," Jack whispered. "I know I can't fix it. I know I missed everything, but I had to try. I had to see you. To say it." "Say what?" she challenged, eyes narrowing. He hesitated, then looked straight at her. "That I regret everything," he said, each word dragged from his soul. "Every second I let pride win. Every moment I didn't chase you. Every day I didn't know my sons." Her expression didn't soften. "Regret doesn't change the past, Jack." Her voice was calm, controlled, even. "It doesn't erase the years I spent holding them alone when they cried. It doesn't give me back the sleep I lost, or the pain, or the birthdays they asked why no one else brought presents." Jack's throat tightened. "I can't take that back. I wish I could, I swear, if I had known." "But you didn't," she cut in. "Because you never looked. You trusted the people who wanted to erase me, and you let them." "I didn't know how to fight for you then," he said, shame thick in his voice. "I was angry and stupid, and I thought I had time." "You didn't," she said. "Time ran out the moment you stopped choosing me." Her eyes met his, and they were hard, not out of hate, but protection. For herself, for her boys. "I became everything for them because I had no other choice, and now you want to walk in and— what? Be dad? Hand out toys and stories and expect them to love you?" "No," he said quietly. "I don't expect love. I just want the chance to be there, to be part of their world, however small it starts." "You can't just buy your way into their hearts," she said. "I'm not trying to," he replied. "That's not why I'm here." He held out the box, a peace offering. She took it hesitantly, opened the lid, and stared at the tiny backpacks and the note. Her eyes lingered on it, unreadable, before she closed the box again and looked back up. "It's sweet," she said coolly, "but they don't need this. They need stability, consistency, presence, not one grand gesture." "Then let me earn it," he pleaded, "day by day, even if it takes forever." She exhaled deeply and glanced toward the play area where Liam and Elias were now sharing a toy train with another child, laughing, their joy untainted by adult grief. "You left me when I needed you most," she said, her voice quieter now. "And I survived. But I'm not sure I'm ready to let you in again just because you suddenly feel something." "This isn't sudden," he said. "It's late, but it's not shallow." "You still don't know who they are," she said, shaking her head. "You don't know that Liam hates loud noises, that Elias has asthma, that Liam eats around his vegetables but always sneaks back for ice cream, that Elias likes to be held when he's thinking because he says hugs help him hear his own thoughts. You don't know the bedtime song, or the fear that comes every time one of them coughs too hard at night." Jack felt like his lungs had collapsed. "Then teach me," he whispered. "Let me learn." She looked away, blinking hard. "It's not just about showing up. It's about being someone they can depend on when it's not convenient. And I don't trust you to do that yet." "Then let me prove it," he said again. "Not with words, with time, with everything I have left to give." "You're asking me to open the door," she said. "And I'm telling you I don't know if it's safe yet, for them or for me." "I'm not walking away again," he said, his voice firm for the first time. "Not ever." Linda turned to look at him fully now, her face tired, beautiful, guarded. She studied him long and hard, as if looking for some part of the man she once loved beneath the wreckage. But then she stepped back, clutching the box tightly. "You can visit," she said, voice flat. "At the park, for an hour. No promises, just presence." His breath hitched with relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she said, "because if you disappoint them, Jack, I won't let you back again." And without waiting for his reply, she turned around, walked toward her boys, and never looked back, just like he once had. The sound of her heels walking away still echoed in Jack's ears hours after she disappeared with the boys into the hospital's pediatric wing, the weight of her final words hanging over him like a guillotine slowly lowering. Not sharp enough to kill, but heavy enough to crush. He remained frozen on the bench long after they were gone, long after the noise of the hospital faded into a background hum of machines and distant conversations, but nothing could drown out the thunderstorm within him. That night, back in his penthouse with its cold walls and city views that once made him feel powerful, Jack sat at the edge of his bed staring blankly at the unopened takeout he'd ordered but forgotten. His phone buzzed with missed calls, his assistant's voice flooding his inbox with reminders of meetings he never showed up to, but none of it mattered anymore. Not the board, not the billion-dollar negotiations waiting in Zurich, not the new merger that would double his global reach. None of it held meaning, not when his children didn't even know the sound of his voice when they cried, or the comfort of his arms when the world scared them. He opened his laptop and dug through years of photo backups, finding a hidden folder buried beneath layers of neatly labeled work files. Linda. Private. He clicked it open slowly, and one by one her face came to life on the screen. Candid shots he'd snapped during their vacations, her laughing in the snow with flushed cheeks, dancing barefoot in the kitchen with a wooden spoon in hand, curled up with a book on the balcony at sunrise. He hadn't looked at these in years. He couldn't. And yet now they were all he had. With every image, his chest tightened, his throat burning with the fire of regret, so strong it left him breathless. He leaned back in his chair, hands covering his face, fingers digging into his scalp as he fought against the overwhelming tide rising in him. The world outside kept moving, traffic below, neon lights flickering across his windows. But he no longer felt like a part of it. Each hour stretched painfully into the next, and sleep became a stranger. He spent that entire night watching her pictures cycle across the screen, remembering every word she ever whispered against his skin, every time she said she loved him, every memory he never truly cherished until now. When the sky turned pale with dawn, he found himself parked outside her building, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. He didn't knock. He didn't text. He just waited, hoping for a glimpse of her, of them, just to know they were real and not a fever dream his heart invented to torture him. When she finally emerged hours later in her scrubs, her hair tied in a neat bun and her tired eyes scanning the street for the rideshare she'd called, he stayed hidden behind tinted windows, his heart thudding like a drum of war. She looked strong, but he could see the exhaustion in the curve of her shoulders, the way she carried her bag heavier than her body should. And when the front door opened again and two tiny figures emerged, bounding toward her with sleepy joy, Jack pressed his forehead to the steering wheel and let silent tears fall, unable to move, unable to breathe. He stayed parked there every morning that week, just watching. He couldn't help it. It wasn't obsession. It was mourning. He was mourning the family he had unknowingly buried beneath his ambition, mourning the moments he could never reclaim, the bedtime stories never told, the fevers he never soothed, the tiny shoes he never learned to tie. His empire began to crumble in the quiet. At work, his presence became ghost-like. He missed meetings, he forgot names, reports sat unread, deals were lost, investors grew impatient. His board called for emergency reviews, his assistant panicked, but Jack waved them all off with vague nods and hollow reassurances. Even his once sharp suits hung loose now, his shirts wrinkled from sleepless nights spent pacing his penthouse or parked outside Linda's building. He no longer cared for the tailored image he'd maintained for years. His world of perfection was cracking, and beneath it, all that remained was the man he used to be. The man who once held her in the dark, promising forever with eyes that didn't know how to lie yet. Days bled into each other, each one marked by her absence. He forgot to eat more often than he remembered, his fridge becoming a place for expired milk and untouched meals. His health took the first hit, migraines, body aches, dizzy spells. But he ignored it. Even when the world around him begged for attention, he gave none of it. All he wanted now was something money couldn't buy. A second chance. Not for power, not for pride. Just for her, and for the two tiny souls whose laughter he had only ever heard from a distance. In the middle of one long, empty afternoon, he found himself at the park where Linda had once agreed to let him visit. He sat on a bench under a tree, unsure whether he came hoping she'd be there, or simply because it was the last place he'd felt like he was doing something right. He waited for hours, but she didn't come. Still, he stayed. It began to rain lightly by dusk, and he didn't move. Let the rain soak him. Let the wind bite. It was more honest than the warmth he used to fake. The next day he returned again, and again the next. Every time he sat there like a man begging heaven for a miracle. His phone lay forgotten beside him. He didn't open his emails anymore. He didn't respond to urgent pings from legal. His lawyer warned that the Zurich merger was falling apart, that shareholders were furious, that the media was starting to circle. But Jack only looked out the window at the overcast sky and asked quietly, "Do you think a man can start over when he's already lost everything that matters?" His lawyer didn't know how to respond. Jack's world, the world he had built brick by brick, deal by deal, speech by speech, was spiraling into a darkness he didn't resist, because in truth, he no longer wanted it. He would give up every office, every title, every aircraft and estate if it meant Linda would look at him again the way she once did, full of trust, full of love, with a future in her eyes. But now she looked through him, like he was a memory that only hurt to recall. His chest ached constantly, but he didn't complain. Pain was deserved. Pain was all he had left of what he once was. When he finally received a text from her, a single line, "We're going to the park at 10 if you still want to try," he stared at it for over 10 minutes, tears burning the back of his eyes before whispering, "Thank you," though no one was there to hear. And when he showed up the next morning, earlier than her, with 2 new books under his arm and a heart barely held together by hope, it wasn't to impress. It was to begin, even if he had to do it from rock bottom, with nothing left but the will to become the man he never was. Jack was ready to crawl through the mess he made if it meant earning even a sliver of redemption in the eyes of the family he lost. Jack sat motionless in his office chair, his tie loosened, the top buttons of his shirt undone, as if trying to breathe again in a life that now suffocated him. The world outside his floor-to-ceiling windows stretched wide and glimmered with opportunity, but it mocked him now, because none of it could give him back what he truly wanted: Linda and the sons he never knew he had until it was almost too late. That realization haunted him like a ghost, whispering regrets into every decision he made. After spending nights sleeping in his car just to be near her building and catching fleeting glimpses of the twins through the playground fence, Jack finally found the courage to act, not as a billionaire with endless resources, but as a man stripped of ego, holding nothing but remorse. He started small. On Monday morning, he showed up quietly at her workplace, dressed in a soft gray sweater instead of a business suit, holding a paper bag with her favorite pastries, still warm from the old cafe he remembered she loved years ago. He left them with the receptionist without saying a word, but attached was a handwritten note that read, "You once said chocolate croissants tasted like childhood dreams." I remembered. I never forgot as much as you think I did. She didn't respond. Tuesday, he waited outside the preschool. When the twins ran out holding craft projects in their hands, he smiled gently and knelt down, asking them if he could take them for ice cream. Linda stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching closely with those unreadable eyes. But she didn't stop them. She watched him laugh with them, draw animals in the whipped cream, and even let them smear sprinkles on his face. Still, when it was time to leave, she only nodded politely and walked away. Wednesday came with a box full of tiny surprises, dinosaur figurines for Liam and a piano-shaped puzzle for Elias, both wrapped in eco-paper and left at their doorstep. Inside the lid was another note, this one trembling slightly in handwriting. "I'm trying to know them, piece by piece, just like I want to rebuild what I lost, with you." That night, Linda opened the window and looked down to find Jack standing under a street lamp in the rain, not moving, holding a bouquet of blue hydrangeas. The flowers, she once said, looked like forgiveness. She closed the curtain, her throat tight. Thursday, he came again, not with gifts, but with silence. He stood beside her car as she got off work, didn't say a word, just opened the door for her and stepped back. She didn't speak either, just drove off, her fingers trembling on the steering wheel. That evening she found a leather-bound book on her porch. It was a journal. The first page read, "Every day I'll write to you, whether you read it or not. Because even if your heart is closed, mine has finally learned how to speak." Friday. He waited with the twins outside the museum where she'd planned a field trip. The boys had begged him to come, and he obeyed like a soldier on command. He bought them matching explorer hats, followed them through every exhibit, and listened with full attention as they explained what they'd learned. Linda kept her distance, but she couldn't deny the way Liam leaned into Jack's side, or how Elias gripped his hand tighter when they got to the dark space exhibit. Her chest ached. That night she called her sister and asked, "Am I cruel for not forgiving him?" Her sister replied, "No, you're careful. There's a difference." Saturday brought a storm. Wind lashed against the windows, thunder cracked the sky, and Jack stood at her doorway, soaked to the bone, holding nothing but an envelope. She opened the door only halfway. He didn't try to come inside. He just handed her the letter and said, "I wrote you something I never had the courage to say out loud. I'll leave it here." Then he walked away, dripping and silent. Linda closed the door, heart pounding. Inside the envelope was a 10-page letter, not of apologies, but of memories. He spoke of her laughter during midnight drives, the way she hummed in the kitchen, how she danced barefoot when she thought he wasn't looking. And then he wrote of his regret, not dramatic, not poetic, but raw and aching. "I failed to fight for you when I should have gone to war with the world. I thought I needed space, but I just needed to grow up." That letter stayed under her pillow all night. She didn't sleep. Sunday morning he brought nothing. No gifts, no letters, no grand gestures. He just sat on the park bench across from her apartment and watched the sky. Linda watched him from the window. He looked still. Not desperate, not performative, just still, like a man who had finally learned the value of patience. Later that day, he knocked softly. She opened the door, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, her hair tied up in a messy bun. Jack's eyes were tired, but they lit up just a little when he saw her. "Can I just say one thing?" he asked. She nodded cautiously. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to deserve it." She looked at him long and hard, her arms crossed, her heart trembling beneath her ribs. "You left us once, Jack. What if you do it again? What if the next apology is the last thread holding me together?" He took a shaky breath, tears threatening to fall. "Then let my actions be the thread this time. Not just words, not promises, but every day, until you can lean again without fear." There was silence, the kind that filled the spaces where love once lived. She nodded slowly. "You can see the boys, but not me. Not yet." It crushed him, but he nodded too. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." And with that, a new rhythm began. He picked the twins up from school twice a week, took them to the library, taught them how to tie shoelaces and bake cookies. He sat in small chairs at their art shows and clapped the loudest. Linda watched from a distance, never interfering, never encouraging. She needed to see if this Jack was real, or just another version destined to fade. She guarded her heart fiercely, because it had taken her 4 years to piece it back together after he shattered it. Every step he took, she measured. Every smile he gave, she weighed. She didn't smile back. Not yet. But she didn't turn away either. One night, Jack dropped the boys off, knelt down to hug them, and whispered, "Tell your mom I'm proud of her, for raising 2 incredible little warriors." Linda overheard. Her hand on the doorknob paused. Her eyes stung. She didn't show it. Instead, she walked into the kitchen, lit a candle, and opened the next letter he'd left. This one spoke of a nightmare he had about losing her voice in a crowd and not being able to find her again. He ended it with, "I hope I'm learning to listen to your silence now, because maybe that's where your truth lives." Slowly, day by day, the walls around her heart began to tremble. Not crumble, not yet, but they no longer stood untouched. She found herself waiting for his journal entries, reading them at night, sometimes even rereading old ones. In one, he wrote, "I used to build empires. Now I build Lego castles with my sons. I think this is the first time I'm building something that matters." Her chest ached, but still she kept her distance. The twins began to mention Dad more naturally now, and Jack never corrected them. He simply let it be. He never asked for more time, never pushed her boundaries. He just showed up, consistently. And in the quietest ways, that consistency began to echo louder than all the roses he once gave her. It was a rainy Thursday when Linda finally opened her front door as Jack approached with the boys. Her voice was soft but clear. "You can stay for dinner, if you want." Jack's breath hitched. He looked into her eyes and saw, not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in the distance between them. He stepped inside, took off his shoes, and followed the scent of home-cooked food, a scent he hadn't smelled in years. At the table, they laughed awkwardly over spilled milk and burnt toast. It was imperfect, unsteady, but it was a beginning. After the boys were asleep, Jack stood at the door, hesitating. "Linda," he said, voice low, "thank you for today." She didn't smile, but she met his eyes. "Keep showing up, Jack. That's all I'll ever need to see." And he nodded, quietly closing the door behind him, leaving behind not just the sound of a healed heart, but the first sign of one that maybe, just maybe, might love again. The door had barely clicked shut behind Jack when the rain began again, tapping rhythmically against the windows like a clock ticking in reverse. Linda stood alone in her hallway, back against the wood, arms folded, but her mind wasn't still. Not tonight. Something in the air felt different, like the heaviness in her chest wasn't born from pain but from possibility. The dinner they'd shared, awkward, unscripted, real, kept looping in her thoughts, not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. And still, it mattered. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She lay on her side, facing the window, watching lightning flash against the clouds, and wondered, how many more nights would he sit outside if she never opened that door again? The question had barely passed her lips when she felt it. The unmistakable pull in her gut that something wasn't right. It was nearly midnight, and a restless kind of silence had fallen over the apartment, the kind that prickled her skin like intuition. She stood, walked to the window with quiet steps, and froze. There, across the street in the shadows of the storm, Jack stood again, his shoulders hunched, his hands stuffed in his soaked coat, his head tilted just slightly back as though trying to let the sky drown his regrets. He wasn't holding anything this time. No letters, no gifts, not even an umbrella. Just himself, stripped down to raw will, as if waiting in the storm could prove something words never could. Linda's heart clenched. She stepped back instinctively, unsure whether to move forward or close the curtain and pretend she hadn't seen. But she didn't move away. She watched as another wave of rain poured down, and Jack didn't flinch, didn't seek cover, didn't walk away. He just stood there, as if his penance was endurance, as if her forgiveness was a door that required suffering to unlock. Minutes passed, then an hour, then another. Lightning cracked again, illuminating his pale face, eyes closed, lips trembling with silent murmurs. And then she heard it, barely audible through the storm, but unmistakably real. Her name. "Linda," he whispered. Once, then again. "Linda." Over and over, like a prayer soaked into the wind. That was it. Her body moved before her mind made the choice. She grabbed the nearest throw blanket, her heart pounding, and dashed down the stairs. By the time she reached him, Jack was shaking, his skin clammy, his hair plastered to his forehead, his lips a faint shade of purple. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of her footsteps, and for a second, his breath caught. "Linda," he said weakly, and his knees buckled. She caught him before he hit the ground. "God, Jack," she whispered, wrapping the blanket around his shoulders as rain continued to fall. "What are you doing? You'll freeze." He didn't answer. His eyes were glassy now, feverish. She touched his forehead and immediately felt the heat radiating off him. "You're burning up," she said, panic blooming in her voice. Come inside, now. He nodded, barely coherent, and let her guide him across the street. She didn't care that they were dripping water onto the rug or that her own clothes clung to her skin. She sat him on the couch, removed his coat, and wrapped him tightly in a second blanket. Stay awake, she said, tapping his cheek gently. Jack, stay with me. He blinked slowly. I didn't want to leave, he mumbled, words slurring. I just wanted to stay near you, even if you never let me back in. Linda swallowed hard. You're not proving anything by standing in the rain. You're sick, Jack. You're scaring me. She left only long enough to grab a towel and a bottle of water, her hands trembling now as she knelt in front of him. He coughed, deep, hoarse from his chest, and shivered violently. She wiped his face, handed him the water, and fought the lump in her throat. You idiot, she whispered, half angry, half afraid. You can't show love like this. You don't get to destroy me once and then freeze to death trying to undo it. He met her eyes through the haze, and something in his gaze shifted, clarity, even through fever. Then tell me how to show you, he croaked. Tell me how to make this right. Before she could answer, two sleepy voices echoed from the hallway. Mom? Liam peeked around the corner, rubbing his eyes. Elias followed, clutching his favorite plush lion. Is someone here? Linda turned and nodded softly. It's Daddy. He's not feeling well. That was all they needed. They ran across the room, crawled up on the couch, and nestled beside him without hesitation. Liam snuggled against Jack's left side, Elias leaned into his chest, and Jack instinctively, protectively, wrapped his arms around both of them. The blanket slipped slightly, revealing the way his hands trembled as they held the boys, trembled not from fever alone, but from the overwhelming truth of being needed, finally, by those he'd missed most. Linda stood frozen, her breath caught. In that moment, something inside her cracked, not the sharp, painful shatter of betrayal like 4 years ago, but the soft breaking of stone kissed by sunlight. It was the first time she'd seen Jack like this. No charm, no business armor, no billionaire ego. Just Jack, a man holding his sons, sick and shivering, desperate and human. And in that moment, he looked nothing like the man who had once walked away from her. He looked like a man trying to become someone new. She sat beside them, gently pulling the blanket back over his shoulders, and reached for his hand. Just for a moment. His eyes flickered to hers. You don't have to forgive me, he whispered, barely audible. But thank you for letting me be here. She didn't answer right away. She watched as Elias tucked Jack's arm around his tiny waist, and Liam closed his eyes, peaceful in his father's embrace. Then she whispered, You're here now. That's what matters tonight. The storm outside didn't stop, but inside their small living room, something else had begun to shift. Not forgiveness, not reunion, but something even more fragile. Recognition. The beginning of understanding. Linda didn't sleep that night. She stayed nearby, checking Jack's fever, making tea, wrapping the boys in warmth, and watching the rise and fall of his chest as if guarding the quietest heartbeat in the world. At dawn, when the sky cracked open with pale silver light, Jack stirred. He looked around, groggy and weak, and whispered, Did I ruin everything again? Linda shook her head. Number, but you scared me. He nodded, ashamed. I didn't know how else to show you, how much I care. Maybe, she said gently, you don't have to show it through suffering. Maybe just showing up and staying is enough. He closed his eyes, a tear sliding down one cheek. Then I'll stay. No more storms alone. She placed a warm cloth against his forehead and finally allowed herself to exhale. She had seen the man behind the mistakes, the father behind the absence, the heart behind the mess. And somewhere in the quiet, as the twins murmured in their sleep, and Jack drifted into rest, Linda's walls, once built from the ruins of heartbreak, allowed a sliver of light to filter through. The morning light spilled through the blinds like gold dust across the hardwood floors of Linda's small but warm apartment, brushing softly against the peaceful figures curled up on the couch. Jack's arm was draped protectively around Liam and Elias, both nestled into his side, their tiny bodies breathing in rhythm with his own, as if even in sleep They had unconsciously begun to trust the man who once disappeared from their lives. Jack stirred first, his head heavy but clearer than it had been in years, and as his eyes blinked open, adjusting to the morning, he caught the faintest sound, his son's quiet giggles from the blanket fort they had crawled into during the night, and then, beneath it, a hum, soft and rhythmic, the kind only a mother could make when pouring her soul into the rhythm of a morning she hadn't dared imagine would feel this whole. Linda was in the kitchen, back turned, sunlight catching the strands of her loose hair, her fingers moving gently as she sliced strawberries into a bowl beside warm pancakes, her favorite Saturday breakfast ritual with the boys, and Jack simply watched her, too stunned, too moved to interrupt the moment that looked like something out of the dreams he'd buried under boardroom deals and cold hotel suites. He didn't speak at first, afraid that even a whisper might shatter the fragile peace that had finally begun to wrap itself around him like a second chance. Instead, he let himself absorb everything. The worn counter she still used, the tiny magnets on the fridge with the boys' finger paintings, the way her body swayed gently while she worked, and the faint hum that rose and fell with the comfort of memory and motherhood. And then, as if sensing the shift in air, Linda turned, not with surprise, but with calm awareness, like she had known he was watching her all along, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. No anger, no accusations, just 1,000 unspoken questions standing between them. Jack rose slowly, careful not to wake Liam, who had his hand loosely curled into Jack's shirt like a quiet claim of belonging, and as he stepped forward, still a bit weak from the fever, he braced himself not against the furniture, but against the weight of his own emotions. This was the first time in years he was standing in front of her, not as a CEO, not as the man who left, but simply as a man who was desperately trying to return home. Linda met his gaze with eyes that no longer held fire, but not quite softness either, more like the steady glow of a candle that had been relit too many times, cautious and careful. And when she spoke, her voice didn't tremble, didn't break. It simply carried the truth she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in silence. "I never stopped loving you," she said, and her words fell into the space between them like stones in a still pond, rippling through every inch of his being. Jack's throat tightened, the air catching painfully as her confession wrapped itself around his heart, not because of the love itself, but because of what came next. "But I can't love a man who's cold," she continued, her eyes unwavering, "who's selfish and scared of feelings. I did that once, and I lost myself trying to hold together something you kept walking away from." Jack stepped closer now, and something in his chest broke open. A dam that had held back every regret, every memory of nights he'd traded warmth for solitude, every time he'd looked at a photo of her and the twins and pretended success tasted sweeter than their laughter. "Then I'll change," he said, voice rough but steady, not a promise made in desperation, but a vow forged in clarity. "I am changing, not because you asked me to, but because I finally see what I became, and I hate that man. I hate who I was. I want to be someone different. For you, for Liam and Elias, and for myself." Linda didn't respond right away, but her lips parted just slightly, and her eyes shimmered. Not with tears, but with a glimmer of something fragile. Hope, maybe, or perhaps the ache of finally being heard. "I want a partner, Jack," she whispered, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable, like the weight of her own honesty was settling over her. "Not someone who buys flowers when it's too late, or makes grand apologies after storms. I want someone who holds my hand in silence when I'm too tired to speak, someone who laughs with the boys without looking at his phone, who chooses home over power, and who shows love without being afraid of how messy or complicated it might get. I want a father who kneels down to understand their fears, not just a man who pays for their dreams." Her words were an invitation and a boundary all at once, soft but firm, like she was drawing the map of what her heart needed and letting him decide if he was strong enough to follow it. Jack closed the distance between them, not with a kiss, not with words, but by gently reaching for her hand, the same hand he had once let go of, and holding it in both of his, warm and sincere. "I'll become that man," he said, not trying to win, not begging, but simply offering himself in the rawest form he ever had. "Even if it takes me the rest of my life." I don't want to impress you, Linda. I want to grow with you, to be the kind of man who teaches Liam and Elias that strength is in tenderness, that being gentle doesn't make you less of a man, it makes you brave. And in that moment, something subtle shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the slow, quiet erosion of the final walls she'd spent years building. The boys ran into the room just then, chasing each other, their small voices echoing like joy through the space. And when they saw Jack holding their mother's hand, they stopped for just a second, looking up as if sensing something they couldn't yet explain. Elias was the first to reach up and hug Jack's leg, followed closely by Liam, who asked, "Daddy, can we all eat together today?" Linda glanced down, and then back at Jack, her answer reflected not in her words, but in the soft smile that ghosted her lips as she nodded gently. As pancakes were served and laughter replaced the silence that had once haunted those walls, Jack sat at that modest kitchen table, no luxury, no boardroom polish, just a father, a man, surrounded by the sounds of life he had almost lost. And in Linda's glance, in the way she didn't pull her hand away when he passed the syrup, he saw it, the very first, tiniest crack in the armor she had built around her heart. Not enough to walk back into her arms, but enough to know that she was watching, waiting, and slowly, maybe even willing, to believe. The sunlight of late spring filtered softly through the trees that lined the quiet park, casting golden flecks over the paved path where Jack walked slowly behind Linda and the twins, his hands tucked into the pockets of his gray wool coat, his heart thudding with something warmer than just nerves. It was the weight of love, of time, of regret turned into resolve. He watched Linda from a few steps behind, her dark hair tumbling loosely around her shoulders, her laughter ringing like a melody as she helped their sons chase bubbles that floated around them, glistening in the late afternoon light. The boys' joy was contagious, their laughter a balm Jack never knew he needed until now, and he smiled faintly, absorbing every sound, every flicker of movement, every second that made this moment feel surreal. Almost too beautiful to belong to a man who had once built walls so high even his own soul couldn't breathe. Yet here he was, not just walking with them, but truly present, immersed in the slow rhythm of love, finally understanding that family wasn't just a duty, it was a universe he never knew how to orbit until now. Linda turned slightly, her eyes catching his with a softness that said more than words ever could, and Jack felt his breath catch at the way she smiled at him, not cautiously, not with old pain hidden beneath polite glances, but genuinely, freely, like a woman who was starting to believe that healing was not only possible, but already unfolding. He quickened his steps slightly and fell into stride beside her, their shoulders brushing in silence, the ease between them slowly melting away the years of broken communication and unsaid apologies. "They've grown so fast," she murmured, watching their sons dart toward the pond ahead, chasing a pair of ducks with innocent squeals of glee, and Jack nodded, his gaze still on her. "I almost missed it all," he said quietly, not as a confession but a truth he refused to ever forget. And Linda looked at him with a knowing tenderness. "You didn't," she whispered, "not really. You came back in time." Jack's chest tightened. He had been rehearsing something for weeks, months if he was honest, but the words always collapsed in his throat, never quite capturing what he truly wanted to say. But now, standing here under the gentle breeze with the scent of Linda's perfume mixing with freshly bloomed lilacs, he realized no amount of rehearsal could replicate what the heart wanted to say in its rawest, most human form. He watched his sons for a moment longer, then slowly reached into his coat pocket, feeling the small velvet box like a heartbeat in his palm. His legs trembled slightly, not from fear of rejection, but from the overwhelming emotion of this turning point, this crossroad where past pain would either be sealed with hope or left open again. "Linda," he said softly, and she turned toward him fully, surprised at the shift in his tone, the way his eyes suddenly shimmered like the lake water under the sun. Without another word, Jack dropped to one knee in the middle of the park path, the box now in his hand, his fingers trembling as he opened it to reveal a ring that wasn't just expensive, it was meaningful. It was a new design, forged from her favorite metals and set with a sapphire instead of a diamond, because he remembered. Remembered how she once told him sapphires were the color of loyalty and calm oceans, of love that withstands storms. Linda froze, the world pausing for her in that split second as her lips parted, her hands lifting slowly to cover her mouth as tears filled her wide eyes. But Jack didn't waver. His voice was low but sure, filled with every inch of pain, growth, and love that had rewoven his identity over these months. "I don't deserve another chance," he began, "but I'm asking for one anyway. Not as the man I used to be, but as the man I became because of you, because of our boys. Because when I look at you, I don't see the years I missed. I see the future I never want to miss again." The ring sparkled in the fading sunlight, catching the light like it too had something to say. "Marry me," Jack continued, his voice thickening with emotion. "Not to fix what was broken, but to celebrate what we built despite it. Not because we forgot the pain, but because we learned how to love better through it. Let's start again. Not at the beginning, but exactly where we are now. Let me give you a life where you're never alone in the dark again. Let me be your quiet, your peace, your constant. I swear I will never stop becoming the man you and our sons deserve." Linda's knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself, bending down to his level, her hands shaking as they cupped his face, her tears falling freely now, leaving trails on her cheeks like the rain they once stood in years ago when he first held her hand under a broken umbrella. "Jack," she whispered, voice cracking with emotion, "I never wanted perfection. I wanted presence. And now, you are that. You're here, truly here. And this is everything." She didn't take the ring right away. Instead, she pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as though anchoring them both to the ground. Jack buried his face in her neck, breathing her in, the scent of home, of forgiveness, of forever. "Yes," she whispered into his ear, so softly he almost thought he imagined it. "Yes, but promise me. Promise me you'll never stop being this version of you, the one who shows up, the one who tries." He pulled back, cupping her cheeks as he nodded slowly, his own eyes red now, the ring still in his hand between them. "I promise," he breathed, and then carefully, with shaking fingers, he slid the ring onto her finger, the sapphire glowing like captured twilight. As if on cue, their sons came running back, spotting their parents on the ground, and their eyes widened with joy. "What's happening?" one of them gasped, and the other squealed as he saw the ring. "Daddy's marrying Mommy!" they shouted in unison, jumping around them in a blur of giggles and claps, their innocent voices piercing the park air with pure, unfiltered happiness. Jack pulled Linda into a kiss, not one of passion, but of soul-deep certainty, a silent vow wrapped in gentleness, warmth, and the unspoken promise of days filled with real love. Around them, the park seemed to respond, the breeze softer, the sky turning into hues of amber and rose, the ducks quacking as if to join the celebration, and strangers paused to smile at the family, caught in a quiet, beautiful moment of reunion and rebirth. Jack held Linda close as their sons danced around them, and for the first time in years, there was no distance, no shadows, only light, only love, only the beginning of something they'd never imagined they'd be lucky enough to find again. The days that followed Jack's heartfelt proposal unfolded like a vivid dream, painted in soft, tender hues. Gentle mornings of planning over tea, afternoons spent with the boys picking out flower petals and cake flavors, and evenings sitting on the porch swing under a glowing sky, where Linda rested her head on Jack's shoulder while he played with strands of her hair, as if committing her presence to memory over and over again. It wasn't just about the ceremony anymore. It was about everything they were building with intention, brick by emotional brick, laughter laid over every memory they chose to make. The wedding was set to be held in the garden of a private estate just outside the city, surrounded by rolling hills and lavender fields that stretched into the horizon like a blessing. Linda chose a gown of ivory silk with cascading sleeves, soft floral embroidery at the hem, and a low back that shimmered when the breeze kissed it gently. Her veil wasn't grand. It was meaningful, hand-stitched by an older woman she had once cared for as a volunteer nurse during college, now gifted back as a gesture of love and admiration. Jack wore a classic black tuxedo with midnight blue accents, his cufflinks engraved with the initials of his sons and Linda's name in tiny, hidden script. The ceremony began in the late afternoon, just as the sun began to lower behind the hills, painting the sky in peach and gold. Rows of white chairs lined the garden path, with clusters of fresh roses in deep burgundy and blush adorning every corner. The guests, only close friends and a handful of loved ones, gathered in warm expectation, each carrying the silent knowledge that this wasn't just a wedding. It was a resurrection of a love that had once almost died, but returned stronger than ever. Music floated through the breeze, soft violins weaving in and out with piano notes, the kind of melody that made hearts swell without a single lyric. When Linda stepped out from behind the garden archway, her hand lightly resting on the shoulder of their twin sons, both dressed in miniature tuxedos with little white gloves and wide smiles, there wasn't a single dry eye. Her beauty wasn't just in her gown or the glow on her skin. It was in her steady gaze toward Jack, in the way she carried herself like a woman who had endured heartbreak, rebuilt her spirit, and chosen love again with clarity. Jack's breath caught as he saw her, his hands twitching slightly at his sides, chest rising with emotion he didn't bother to hide. The boys walked ahead, carrying the rings on satin pillows, their proud little feet tapping in sync as they giggled at the petals falling around them. As Linda approached, every step echoed years of longing, forgiveness, rediscovery, and the vow they were about to make, not just as husband and wife, but as a real family, complete at last. Their vows weren't rehearsed, but they were perfect. Jack held her hands and said, voice cracking only slightly, I used to think power made me whole. But you taught me that love makes a man worthy. You gave me sons who show me joy every day. And now, if you'll let me, I want to give you a life where you never have to carry the weight alone again. Linda smiled through tears, squeezing his fingers as she replied, You weren't perfect. Neither was I. But together, we became more. You are my calm after every storm, and I am yours. And I vow to choose you, even when the days are hard, even when life is messy. I'll choose us, every time. The officiant's voice faded into the wind as he pronounced them husband and wife, and Jack didn't hesitate. He kissed her with a soft urgency that spoke of years wasted and lifetimes yet to come. Applause erupted as rose petals rained from above, the sun dipping just enough to create a halo of light around them as they turned to face the crowd, hand in hand, two little boys running into their arms seconds later and pulling them into a group hug that had everyone watching quietly wipe away tears. Later that evening, the reception unfolded beneath strings of fairy lights and golden lanterns hanging from the trees, casting a warm, magical glow over the long wooden tables adorned with candles, handwritten menus, and centerpieces made of fresh wildflowers, some picked by the twins themselves that morning. There was music, slow, soul-deep songs that made people close their eyes while swaying to their memories. Jack and Linda had their first dance barefoot on the grass, holding each other tightly as if letting go would unwrite the journey they'd carved into the stars. Linda rested her cheek against